So today we're talking about FRBs, which according to Google is Federal Reserve Board. But that's not the right FRB. We're interested in these FRBs, fast radio bursts. Mysterious signals that we've known about since 2007, which as the name implies are radio bursts, but are also extremely fast, usually lasting only a few milliseconds, which is why it took so long for the scientists to find them. We just did not have the technology needed to detect such extremely fast pulses. But now we do, and we actually are discovering so many of them pretty much at all times. Hello wonderful person, this is Anton, and today we're going to be discussing this new FRB that was detected very recently that seems to defy all of the previous detections. And it also seems to be the strangest FRB detected so far. Because first of all, it's much longer, but also because it's exhibiting unusual patterns that the scientists described as heartbeat. And so let's discuss this discovery in a little bit more detail, but I guess let's start with a basic overview. So, back in 2007, the scientists realized that there are actually these unusual radio signals that seem to appear and disappear really quickly, and that seem to come from pretty much every direction in the universe. Although usually from distances in billions of light years away from us, so basically from some of the more distant galaxies out there. Eventually the scientists realized that many of these fast radio bursts are also highly polarized and also exhibit very natural patterns that usually form around very powerful magnetic fields. And although many of us really hope that these signals are coming from some kind of an alien civilization, in reality, pretty much all of the signs here pointed at some kind of a neutron star, very likely a magnetar, that seems to undergo something inside of it, which then releases these very powerful radio emissions, whose total power is actually equivalent to what our sun would produce in several months. Or another way of seeing this is if you were to take several million suns and have all of them release this energy in a fraction of a second. Now, on the other hand, completely independently of all of this, for roughly 2 decades, the scientists in Canada were actually designing this really interesting radio telescope known as CHIME, Canadian Hydrogen Intensity Mapping Experiment, located right there in British Columbia. And originally, this instrument was supposed to be responsible for detecting various radio emissions of hydrogen at extremely far away distances from planet Earth, or basically the outskirts of the observable universe, and its main purpose was to study the mystery of the dark energy. Specifically, it was designed to study what's known as the baryon acoustic oscillations, which can be sort of imagined as these bubbles of overdensity across the universe that were actually formed in the beginning of the universe and can help us understand how everything evolved and essentially how the dark energy works as well. And these particular oscillations, or overdensity, can generally be seen by various very powerful radio telescopes. But pretty quickly, the scientists using this telescope realized that it also seems to be excellent at detecting fast radio bursts coming from everywhere. And this telescope was designed to detect things extremely fast. It's actually able to create a kind of a 3D image of where the signal comes from, by essentially detecting minute variations in the arrival time of the signal, even though the telescope is relatively small in size, which in theory allows this telescope to then form a kind of a 3-dimensional map of the hydrogen around the universe. But in this case, it also forms a 3-dimensional image of where the signals usually come from. And in case of radio bursts, it allows us to track their origin. And because it's able to detect extremely quick signals, completely by accident, its design allows us to detect all of these FRBs and then even track them to their origin before any other telescope can do so. And so within just a few years, lots and lots of different FRBs have already been discovered, confirmed, and one of them has even been tracked by this telescope to the location in the Milky Way galaxy where we know there is an active magnetar. The video about this is somewhere right there or in the description below. Which once again implies that at least some FRBs seem to be produced by magnetars, at least to some extent. But there could be others, and there could be other FRBs that we still cannot explain. Like for example, currently there is no explanation for why certain FRBs only seem to happen once, yet others seem to repeat with a very specific period. And moreover, there is really no good explanation for an actual mechanism of how any of this works. So if it is magnetars, what exactly is causing this? It's been suggested that it could be some kind of a star quake, or basically an earthquake on a neutron star, but at the moment nobody knows. And with so many new FRBs detected pretty much every week, we're not really any closer to resolving this mystery. Because their intensity, their wavelength, their polarization and dispersion all seem to vary too much to be explained by a single phenomenon. And this new FRB really kind of takes the cake here. it seems to be the most unique and the most unusual yet. So first of all, calling this an FRB is actually a bit of a misnomer. It wasn't really that fast. Compared to everything else, it was at least 1,000 times longer. As you can see from this graph, it lasted several seconds. And similarly to other FRBs that have been discovered to be repeaters, this one also repeats, but instead of creating a certain pattern, it strangely creates these heartbeat-like functions with this unusual pattern that currently nobody can explain. In other words, instead of just happening once or blinking just one time, kind of similar to this iconic FRB known as FRB 121102, in this case, it doesn't just blink, it seems to blink several times for at least 4 seconds, with several major bursts occurring within about 3 seconds. And because in this case the actual peaks were extremely precise, and the period itself also seems to be quite precise as well, this at the moment seems to be the most mysterious signal we've seen so far. And so if this is coming from a magnetar, nobody knows what can possibly cause this. Chances are it's coming from something else. And because this is also coming from a galaxy several billion light years away from us, and also because these emissions are very powerful, it naturally implies that the object in this case is also ridiculously powerful as well. Although based on the frequency distribution, it still appears to be quite a natural signal and not some kind of an alien civilization. And when the scientists analyzed these frequencies a little bit more, they realized that individually, each of the spikes does seem to resemble something we usually detect around magnetars and pulsars. Except that in this case it would be millions of times more powerful and brighter than any magnetar or pulsar we've ever detected, and also it has this unusual repetition that's never been seen before. And because generally in the universe it's kind of difficult to find objects that are periodic and tend to produce predictable patterns, this is once again an extremely intriguing discovery and a new mystery that we cannot answer. Which once again highlights that approximately a decade ago, we basically began the so-called golden age of radio astronomy. We now have so many new discoveries and so many new mysteries that it's becoming impossible for the scientists to catch up to the explanations with the theories lagging behind. And we've actually discussed some of the other radio discoveries and radio mysteries in some of the previous videos that should be in the description or maybe somewhere right there. But I guess when it comes to this particular signal, well, because this is a relatively recent paper and a relatively recent discovery, at least for now, it's going to remain a mystery. Although one explanation that the scientists propose in this case is in regards to the signals very likely being formed in the magnetosphere of some kind of a neutron star. Or essentially the extremely powerful magnetic field that forms around these objects might somehow generate these extremely powerful radio emissions using a mechanism we still don't understand. But that's just one of the explanations, and chances are more explanations will be provided in the months to come. And we'll definitely come back and talk about this once there's a paper that tries to tackle what's actually happening in this particular system, in this particular galaxy. Until then, thank you for watching, subscribe, maybe share this with someone who loves learning about space and sciences, and come back tomorrow to learn something else. Support the channel on Patreon by joining channel membership or by buying the Wonderful Person t-shirt you can find in the description. Stay wonderful, I'll see you tomorrow, and as always, bye bye.